Welcome to Tell Me More, the all-steel podcast where design meets innovation and we explore the limitless potential of workspaces. In this exclusive series, we're peeling back the layers of workplace design. From the psychology of colors to the future of hybrid work, join us as we open doors to conversations with industry leaders, architects, and designers who redefine the modern workplace. This is Tell Me More, brought to you by Allsteel, because when it comes to designing the future, there's always more to discover.
Welcome to the Tell Me More podcast. My name is Lauren Gant, and I am a Senior Workplace Advisory Manager with Allsteel. Today, I am so excited to share a continuation of our conversation around trauma-informed design. We're going to be sharing some new exciting research that we are doing, and I am joined by my esteemed friend and colleague, Dr. Rachel Drosdick-Sigafoos. Thanks for coming, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren. I really appreciate this.
To start it off, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Rachel, and I am the owner, operator of an organization called the Well Workforce. I have my doctorate in human and social services with a specialization in disaster crisis intervention. My specialty is working with critical incidents, more or less. So crisis population, individuals who are experiencing homicidal, suicidal, psychotic features. But a lot of my doctoral work and postdoctoral work, everything I do with the Well Workforce is working with the population, the employees who are responsible for delivering these very challenging methods of care to traumatized populations. And unfortunately, what I found along the way in many ways is that the personnel who are engaging in providing care for the rest of us are going through a lot of really challenging things, and how their workplace is set up, how their lives are set up, how they're coping is a direct predictor of whether their clients will experience success and whether they themselves, as both the employee, but also their whole people, will experience satisfaction in their lives, whether they'll experience positive mental health, whether they'll have positive coping factors, or whether they'll really go through very challenging things in their life and may at some point become or experience their own crisis in their own life because of the things that they experience as part of their work life.
Right. So when we at Allsteel started doing this work in trauma-informed design, we got connected because you are doing this amazing work from the standpoint of mental health, from the standpoint of attraction and retention in the workplace. And so when we combined forces, it was kind of a cool synergy that we're both sort of thinking about this problem of what is trauma, what are the impacts of trauma at work? And we're sort of attacking it from different, maybe attacking isn't the right word for this conversation, but we're addressing it from different angles a little bit. So I don't know, can you talk a little bit about why this is this topic of trauma-informed design or thinking about trauma in the workplace, why this has been an interest to you?
Yeah, so it all started at what I would say a sort of odd juncture for me. I worked for a long time with a community-based mental health organization, and we had these horrendous beige, dirty walls. And I had a conversation with one of the maintenance guys. Our main building, which is not where I was because I was in crisis, so we were sort of relegated to our own area for some safety reasons.
You were in crisis area of work, not literally in crisis, right?
Working in the crisis departments. We were relegated to our own area for some safety reasons. And so our main building had gone under this amazing overhaul. We got not just a redesign. They literally took walls down. They put in new windows. And I asked one of the maintenance guys, like, why are our walls this terrible beige color? And he took me back to the maintenance area and he showed me that the paint color was literally called clinical beige. And it was like this flash to the movie version of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And you could almost see that this pattern of like what we would colloquially be like, oh, the white padded walls, but that this was actually at some point considered this horrible, dirty looking, dull color was considered soothing and best practice. And that isn't what was conveyed. What was conveyed was that this was an environment of dullness as opposed to vibrancy. And when you're talking with someone about a decision between life and death, certainly you want vibrancy to be what is imbued into them. So it's sort of spun out from there in talking with other personnel about what this redesign meant for them, and became very much, how do we foster an environment where employees feel proud to walk into, we feel safe to walk into, and we feel inspired by the settings around us, as well as when we're having these very overwhelming experiences because we've been traumatized in the workplace or we have a history of trauma. What do we do? Where do we go so that we can actually soothe those thoughts? And so H&I and Allsteel have brought this other perspective. So for me, coming from this perspective of trauma triggers, experiences of trauma, and especially turnover intentions, which is the financial why behind a lot of this, but this expertise of how we set up a space, the ergometrics of it can also influence our mental health, our functioning through work. And finally, what this research has been establishing is, how does this actually soothe our triggers and prevent them from happening so that we don't feel more likely to want to leave our jobs?
Right. And you, in that environment, you are sort of surrounded by it, right? You're dealing with it yourself. You're dealing with it in your work. You're dealing with it in your environment. So that's interesting that all of these things came together to a head in that way for you.
Yeah.
Clinical beige, I can just see it now. That's very illustrative. So, Rachel, over the last year or so, we've been involved in this research. You and I together, and Allsteel and the Well Workforce have been collaborating on this research to really understand. We have had this sense that workplace trauma, that the environments impact our intentions as employees to be able to be productive, to be able to be motivated, to be able to feel like we have some satisfaction at work. We've sort of had this hunch, right? And so we wanted to embark in some research together to talk about that a little, or to investigate that a little bit more. Do you want to share a little bit about, the goals of this research, or what we were setting out to do?
Sure. So, Lauren, don't want to speak on your behalf, but it sounds like a lot of the conversation that H&I and Allsteel have encountered when proposing trauma-informed design has been, okay, but this costs money, and what's the point of it? So there were a couple of different prongs that we needed to hit here. The first was, let's really establish in the workforce, how are people experiencing their trauma triggers? And so the first was a set of questions of, did you experience any childhood trauma? Have you experienced any adulthood trauma? And have you ever experienced a trauma in your workplace? Unfortunately, the answer to those was an overwhelming yes. The adverse childhood experiences, which is the official list of childhood trauma, tends to run about 60 to 60% of the adult population in the United States has experienced a childhood trauma. Ours was a little bit higher. We were right around 75% have experienced a childhood trauma. We also determined that a lot of people had experienced adulthood trauma outside of their workplace, and alarmingly that 74% had experienced workplace trauma. So something that significantly overwhelmed their ability to cope. So the first was, what about trauma? Where does it happen? How has it happened? Tell us a little bit more about that. And that was a very basic component. So we were working on a quantitative component there. The second was...
Sorry, if I just might stop you there. That was very telling to me, this idea that, we had some idea that childhood trauma, we were in the ballpark of our childhood trauma, I think, metrics that we sort of understood. The number, you said 74% of our population reported at least one workplace trauma. I found that to be very surprising. I don't know if you felt the same there.
I wish I could say I was more surprised than I was.
Mm-hmm.
The personnel who took our survey, which was 101 working professionals in the United States, came from many different areas of professions. So we had people from architecture and design, we had people from K-12 education, higher ed, medical fields, social services, which includes mental health. We had people from construction, manufacturing, consulting. It was literally across the board, people were represented. Coming from the mental health world, and working especially with first responders, we know trauma is happening there.
Right.
Full disclosure, I have had bodily fluids put on me. I have been groped in the workplace. And I think even if you think about something like bartending, it is unfortunately not uncommon for bartenders to be groped. So things like this can happen all over. But then when you think also about if you're an educator, for example, and there is a word that perhaps somebody in the building has a firearm, that's an experience that too many educators are having nowadays. So I think when we think more about what are the things we hear about on the news, we can see why that number is so high.
Yep. And we didn't outline those, traumas for individuals. We let them sort of self-determine as it should be, right?
Yes.
Whether they internalize that as a workplace trauma or not.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we can come back to that. So our first goal was really about understanding what how people reported their trauma, what the percentage of people reporting trauma was. And you were just about to talk about the second goal, and I interrupted you. So do you want to talk a little bit about the second goal?
By all means. So the second was, how often in your workplace do you feel triggered? And a secondary question, how often do you feel so overwhelmed by a trigger or worrying about being triggered that you feel it's difficult to complete work tasks? This was a really instrumental part because we wanted to understand, how is trauma showing up in the workplace? Who is it showing up for? And how often is that making it challenge to complete your job? That was illuminating, to say the least. What our respondents said is that those who do not have access to quiet spaces or tend to work in very public, bustling spaces tend to feel more triggered. Also, people who are entry-level employees are much more likely to experience a trigger than, for example, a CEO. And we did have some CEOs and executives respond. The reason that we wanted to ask that question was because when trauma embeds in our brain, and so trauma is anything that is an overwhelming event that threatens or causes physical or emotional harm or is life-threatening, it causes a lasting effect that changes our health and well-being. One of those is that trauma can shut down, more or less, your prefrontal cortex when you're activated. Your prefrontal cortex is responsible for planning, connecting with others, evaluating. So 3 of the things that we do most often in our jobs, we have to plan what our workday is going to look like. We have to connect with our coworkers, our clients, we have to connect with ourselves, and we have to be able to evaluate the work that we're doing. If you're triggered, if you're activated, and your prefrontal cortex is shut down, you're going to have a very challenging time doing your job. 78% of our respondents reported having difficulty completing their job tasks due to being triggered or worrying about being triggered. That's 1 in 5 almost.
And so can you say that one more time?
Yes. So 78% of our respondents worried about or were triggered to the extent that they had difficulty completing their job duties.
Yeah. And that's, to our knowledge, that this is the first time that question has been asked, right?
Yes.
This is sort of like a new bit of information that really is telling us, we have sort of always intuited that being in this trauma state makes it hard for us to concentrate, to get our work done. But this is, evidence suggesting that, and not just being activated, but worried about being activated as well.
Yes. Absolutely. That state of escalation, that concern for being escalation, is its own symptom of trauma. And it really goes towards, if you are concerned that you need to avoid a certain atmosphere at work. You're concerned that you're going to interact with somebody who in the past has caused you to have a certain reaction, either because they remind you of somebody consciously or subconsciously, or because in the past they have been somebody who's been a concern for you, somebody who activates you because of behavior that they're directly exhibiting towards you or around you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to go back to, you mentioned that people who didn't have as much access to quiet spaces, who were also at entry level positions, those two features sort of stood out to us as being, higher percentage of people reporting this experience. Now, what I took out of that was something about control. There's something about
Yes.
ability to choose, ability to speak up to, I don't know, can you speak to those two findings a little bit?
Absolutely. So one of the really specific features of trauma, the event itself, is that it tends to come from experiences where we do not perceive control over the outcome. It is a very different situation. As an example, it's a very different situation if you're in a catastrophic car accident and you are immediately able to exit the vehicle and move out of the road, as opposed to you are in a catastrophic car accident and it takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes for someone to be able to extract you from the vehicle. The extended period of time where you feel that lack of control, where you cannot find safety, increases the likelihood that the thing embeds in your body, in your mind, as a trauma. That means that when we don't have control over environments, we don't perceive control over our environments, we are more likely to be triggered because that lack of, I can stay safe because I have a way to choose my own safety, it puts us on alert. And the more alert we are, the more activated we are, the more likely we are to have that triggered experience.
Right. And so that ability to control can kind of show up in either I have control over how and where I perform the work duties that I need to do during the day.
Yes.
And it can also show up in I have control in who I interact with or how those interactions happen from a cultural standpoint.
Right. Yeah. We also saw this importance of control in one of the other areas about what are some spaces that you would prefer to help you, for example, feel focused, feel creative, feel soothed if you are concerned about being triggered. We had a lot of people who said that they would prefer to have access both to public or semi-public spaces and to quiet spaces. So a lot of people said, I want both of those things. We didn't ask. That was just to choose whatever works best for you. And I loved that because it also speaks to the power for us to engage choice and autonomy. Having choice and autonomy in our daily lives is one of the most important things. It is one of the most adult things that we have to do. That's what we're training up our kids to do, is exhibit choice and autonomy in responsible ways. And yet in our workplaces, it can be much more challenging because we may not have the option of how we express that choice, how we express our autonomy. But overwhelmingly, respondents said, I'd like to have some different options.
Yeah, and I think it also suggests this very human thing of some days I want one thing, some days I need something else, and I'm not going to be showing up to work the same, in the same mental capacity every single day either. And whether that's related to trauma or whether that's related to some other neurodiversity or just choice, it's all we can help with some of those navigations through thinking about a floor plate as a whole ecosystem rather than sort of a one option solution.
Well, and I love that terminology of ecosystem because I think ecosystem can be so well applied to this. It does not rain every day. It is not sunny every day. Sometimes the weather is just the weather. And similarly, sometimes we are a little bit rainy or a little bit sunny. And our work requires very different things of us on any given day. So for example, some days you may be very much in a mode where you are meeting with a lot of people. You are doing very social things. You're collaborating a lot. And other days you're very buckled down. You've got your door shut if you're able to do that. And so what we need in those different moments is very different as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And so I think, this maybe wasn't a surprising finding for us, but it was very telling that this did come out as something out of this research that we conducted.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about one of our goals being understanding, how common it is to experience workplace. We talked about what this means for attention. Were there any other goals of the research that you want to highlight today?
Yeah, so unfortunately, one of my specialties is understanding why people choose to leave their jobs and what are some of the things that make them want to leave their jobs. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of the financial why. We have to be able to justify any changes that we're going to be making because that's fiscal responsibility. So being fiscally responsible means understanding what are the factors that are going into this. What we determined with, again, overwhelmingly like statistically significant, but also a very strong effect is that people who are more triggered in their environment or have more difficulty completing their tasks because they're worried about being triggered are more likely to want to leave their jobs. It costs typically about 60% of a person's annual salary to replace them because there's advertisement, there's loss of work time, there's putting extra workload on other people. So there may be overtime or some bonuses that we have to pay out in order to compensate for that work. If we can retain employees, we also retain people who are doing their job, who understand what their job are, and they're doing it exceptionally well. If we can keep those people engaged, because we're making sure that they have access to spaces so that they can feel soothed and calm and confident, then you're saving yourself money.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what this research is suggesting is not only giving people some sense of comfort as far as I'm going to have the spaces and places that meet my needs, not only helps them be more productive, but also has some impact on attraction and retention. And that's what we're trying to highlight here, is that we've sort of always had this hunch that these things were correlated, and this is really suggested to be true in this research that we've conducted.
So is. So one of the pieces of literature that we cited was a study on ergonomics from about 1994, so about 30 years ago. But it was physical ergonomics, and the recommendations were so spot on for how we perceive our mental environment as well, that it was kind of like, it was so on the nose without having talked about why we need to offer some options to people and how doing the same thing over and over and over again increases the likelihood of injury. For me, as someone who, I'm not a neuroscientist by nature, but I do dabble in it because of the work that I do. It just was, when we offer choice, when we offer methods for people to have autonomy in their spaces and really avoid injury, hey, we're more likely to have some people who enjoy working here and actually do want to come here. You mentioned attraction. One of the studies that we cited actually did say, hey, when there's an inviting workplace, people are actually more attracted to hire, to be brought on by you, than if they don't perceive that it's a safe and attractive workplace.
Right. So yeah, just linking that emotional and mental state with the design of environment is really interesting here.
Yes.
Okay, so we have some suggestion that employees who struggle to complete their work tasks because of this stress or concern about being activated makes them more likely to want to leave their current position. In our research, we dug into this idea a little bit of how likely are you to leave your current job, your current employer, and your current profession?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. So I like to use a scale. It's called the Turnover Intention Scale by Cohen. And so it's a 9-point turnover intention scale. Typically we see a 3-point, and it's just, do you want to leave your job? Well, our job can mean, for example, our job is very specifically the position that we're in right now. So whatever your current title is, and then you have your employer. Do you want to leave your employer? Would you leave this organization? And third is, do you want to leave your career? Do you want to go into a whole different field? It's not enough for you just to leave the current job role or the current employer. The folks who said that they were feeling highly triggered were most likely to not just want to leave their job, not just want to leave their employer, but they wanted to leave their entire career. In other words, I'm going to use nurses as an example because I think nurses are particularly at risk. If you think about a nurse's station, they're loud, they're noisy, someone's always in front of you, someone always needs you. There's like no place to escape to. And the reason that you're interacting with people, if you're in a nursing facility, for example, like an ICU or an emergency room, they're not particularly pleasant situations that you're interacting with people for. Most of them are catastrophic, life-threatening, or life-saving, where there's not a middle of the road here. If you're a nurse and you're thinking about how do I avoid these triggers, if your specialty is ICU, if your specialty is ER, you can't just move to a different ER and hope that you're not going to have that experience. You're going to have to change fields or change specialties, which in some places is changing fields, so that you can avoid that trauma trigger. That was most prominent, that people who feel who have experienced workplace trauma were most likely to consider leaving their field, as opposed to, for example, someone who has adulthood trauma, but not workplace trauma. They're like, maybe I'll leave my job, but maybe not the field. So where a person has that, we talked about the concern for trigger, where people feel that their current space is going to be a concern for a trigger, regardless of where they go, those are the folks who are most likely to want to consider leaving their jobs, their careers.
Yeah. And so I think this is interesting too, to parse out a little bit, because there is a cultural element here. The culture that surrounds a nursing profession and a culture that might surround a knowledge worker profession are quite different. And again, it maybe comes back to this idea of control. How much, when I am in a nursing environment, for example, the what shows up that day sort of dictates what I do, versus if I, have some autonomy over how my job gets done in a given week or a given day. Maybe it again speaks to that idea of impacting the cultures in which we're showing up, that we feel like we have some ability to change that culture, to change that design, to ultimately foster these feelings of workplace engagement, reduced workplace stress and through that lens.
Yeah.
And we did do some work into understanding how people prefer to navigate these spaces, where they find spaces to sort of soothe these anxieties. I thought the dichotomy here was really interesting. Like we talked about before, it's not just one blanket response. I don't know if you want to speak to any of those, or I can share my favorites.
You're the design expert. I would love to hear from yours and then decipher if I need.
I thought, we saw some conflicting reports on things like color stimulation.
Yes.
Some people thought that bright colors, found them to be very soothing, and others wanted areas that maybe not clinical beige, but right. something more calming. Like, I thought that was a very interesting dichotomy that was pointed out in the research.
Yes. And I think some years ago, red went through a dining room phase, and someone, I don't know who said it, but someone said red makes people feel hungry, and so paint your dining rooms red. There are not as many red dining rooms anymore, and I don't know whether some of that is also embedded a little bit in why people have the strong feelings that they do about colors here. But people, by and large, they did not want dull or outdated colors, but generally speaking, really enjoyed subdued colors. The bright color, as you said, Lauren, was polarizing.
Yes.
We had, I think, 20% loved it and 23% hated it, or vice versa. But the number was like really close. Yes, 20% found it soothing, 23% were like, please don't do that. Please don't give me bright colors. And Lauren, you mentioned neurodiversity. I think there's a lot that comes along with that.
Right.
There is a high crossover, and the science is still out. We have a lot of conjecture about why people who have a history of trauma are more likely also to exhibit symptoms of neurodiversity, whether that's ADHD, autism, so on and so forth. But someone who's neurodiverse often has a predisposition not to enjoy bright colors or to have a very high attraction to it. So I think that's borne out with, well, maybe the answer isn't paint everything lime green or bright red, but have pops of color that somebody who is attracted to that can go to that area, can go to that picture, can go to that space and feel that invigoration or that soothing, but that it's not drowning somebody or really overstimulating somebody who is at risk of overstimulation already.
Right, right. And to your point earlier, it didn't seem like the white was the answer either, or
right?
It was color, but the intensity of that color seemed to be another space consideration I found really interesting was that people, reported both public and private spaces were desired. People where they could have individual solo time and also collaborative area, but people tend to say that they gravitated toward group spaces with more relaxed or flexible seating options.
Yes. And this was not close. Where color was, okay, we're kind of close. When asked to choose, and they weren't asked to choose between them, people just naturally did choose between formal table and chairs or relaxed, flexible group seating options. Overwhelmingly, people want relaxed, flexible seating options. Whether they were being collaborative or studious or social, or creative, that those relaxed, flexible spaces, again, so now flexible is autonomy, allowed people to feel, or they report it helps them feel more inspired to complete their work tasks. I don't know if I understand the science of why that might be. You certainly would be able to speak to it better, but you talk about intuiting something. Intuitively, absolutely, I understand that I prefer to sit across comfortable seats from one another. We are social creatures. We have these amazing things called mirror neurons that help us understand our environment and converse with the people around us in a very fluid and seamless way. I understand why sitting in comfortable chairs next to somebody 90 degrees from somebody is more comfortable than sitting across a table from somebody right away. That gives me like a punitive feel.
Right. And again, it's not for every type of conversation, but when we're specifically talking about these opportunities to find a moment of soothingness or calm. I'll just point out one more that I found interesting was this idea of flexibility and choice in access to different kinds of regulation. One of those being reliable access to private or semi-private spaces. And I thought that phrasing of reliable access was really interesting. This idea, again, that I don't need to enclose myself. I don't need to isolate myself for the full day, but having the confidence that I can have access to that space if and when I need it, people seemed to gravitate towards.
So there was a specific question that we asked, which was whether you have access to a secondary space. And the answers were written very intentionally as, yes, I have access and I feel empowered to use it. I have access to secondary space, but it does not fulfill my needs. I have access to secondary space, but I do not perceive that I'm empowered to access it. So Lauren, you've actually shared something about a design that you did, a group that you worked with. I don't know if you'd feel comfortable, because that was the inspiration for why we worded this question the way that we did.
Can you give me a prompt?
This is the nursing room.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yes. I worked with a designer who was sharing that they had a lactation room and a mother's room or a nursing room, whatever your verbiage of choice is. And the experience for the users of this space, for people who were nursing in these spaces, was that from the entry point of the door, you could see directly into the CEO's office. Now, the room was open for them to use. It was, by policy, they could use this room, but they did not feel comfortable using this space, right? They felt, whether they were being monitored or not was sort of an internal battle they were struggling with. Now, the CEO was a female, also a mother. She was very much saying, I'm not watching. I'm not paying attention. But for the people using that space, it was very much a barrier. It did not feel reliable. It did not feel safe. And they were able to make some adjustments to make that space feel more accessible. But simply checking the box in this case was not actually meeting the needs of the people within that space.
There's something really profound in that story. The whole arc of it I felt watched. I felt monitored. I didn't have information specifically that said you are being monitored,
right?
But the door being where it was, I perceived barriers in the use of this room. Now, this extends far beyond just a lactation suite. If you put a calm down room, if you put a meditation room, a prayer space across from a CEO's office, you can assume, will people use it? No. Because they're going to be concerned that somebody will begin to, did you see? Did you know about? I can't believe they're using that so often.
I saw them go in there yesterday and they're back in there today.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. This is actually really terrible. I know of a college who has a therapy space that they were considering bridging and using the therapy space also as the lactation suite. But the therapy space in the past had been used as a locker room. And so it was deemed not to meet health standards to promote a lactation suite, but it did meet standards to host therapy, to which my response was, I love that you have to go to the sewer room to get therapy. It's not a sewer room, but I felt like the joke kind of wrote itself. These secondary spaces need to be designed, as you said, not just we checked the box, but does it actually meet the needs that our employees are expressing to us in both the physical spaces, so they can physically access it, but also the emotional spaces of, I feel empowered that I am able to use that without fear that there's going to be some sort of repercussion for me just trying to take good care of myself.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, we are so excited about this research because, to our knowledge, these questions haven't been researched in this way before. So, we really wanted to understand the scope of this problem, the financial implications of this consideration, both through ability to pay attention, to be present at work, and in terms of how likely are people to leave their position. Yeah. We also wanted to understand whether, the things that we had been considering for design consideration were on the right track. And we are excited to continue this research, to share this research. Are there any other big heavy hitter, findings that you want to dive into, Rachel?
I don't think there's any other big ones. I think for me, as a crisis worker, as the traumatologist, as an interventionist, the overarching result for me, and it's not the written results, but it's what I emotionally carried away from it, is when you provide spaces for people to feel safe and connected and human with one another, and you provide spaces for people to manage themselves, they feel good about that. This is unfortunately a little bit later to the field of trauma-informed care in general. For a long time, trauma-informed care has been delivered from employee to client to student to patient. We're finally coming to the point where we're understanding, and this is an exploratory research study. It's not comprehensive,
Right.
But we're finally getting to the place where we're more commonly asking the question, what about the trauma-informed care for employees? It can't just be that it starts with them and they're going to deliver it. It's best to view employees as conduits of trauma-informed care. We're delivering trauma-informed care to our personnel so that they can deliver trauma-informed care to their patients and clients and students.
And the workplace cannot be a barrier for us to experience that ourselves. It has to really be supportive of those initiatives as well.
Yeah.
Well, I have just really enjoyed this research journey with you, Rachel, and we're so excited to announce that we are going to be sharing some of this content at South by Southwest in March. So if you are in that area, look us up. We'd love to have you join. Also look for more content, summarizing some of these exciting research findings that we're learning about. So I hope this piques your interest in some of the things that we're working on. We really want to continue this conversation, to evolve our understanding, to continue to learn and grow about how to make a better human experience for everyone at work. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything else you'd like to plug or mention before we sign off today?
I love to close all of my talks with the same affirmation. And so I'll share that here. A long time ago, when I was just starting to work with the crisis population, asked a buddy of mine who had worked with really traumatized personnel for the duration of his career, how did you do this for as long as you did? And he said, Rachel, you don't have to save the whole world. You just have to save enough of yourself to save a little bit of somebody else. Mm-hmm. In other words, you have to take good enough care of yourself so that when it's somebody else's worst day of their life, you're ready to receive them and be prepared to do that. I also think that this extends to the research that we did, making sure that our workspaces are set up so that when our employees are having one of those really challenging days, we've got enough space saved for them so that they can regulate, take care of themselves for 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and get back to the life-saving work that many people are doing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I just appreciate you and your viewpoint so much. Thank you for lending your expertise and your, support to this topic. And I just look forward to having more conversations with you.
Thank you so much.
So, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating episode of Tell Me More. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of design and innovation. If you're hungry for more insights and stories, make sure to subscribe to Tell Me More on your preferred podcast platform. As we sign off, remember that the conversation doesn't end here. Connect with us on social media at Allsteel and share your thoughts, questions, or even your favorite moments from the podcast. We love hearing from our engaged and curious audience. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll continue exploring the Design to Do More philosophy. Until then, thanks for listening.